So,
just briefly back on that conversation about Rupert Spira. Rob, certainly what I found, I've never been to any of his retreats or sessions, but the compassion with which he engages his teaching and his audience is so noticeable. It's all from the heart, deeply so. And I think, Chris, you'll agree, of the years that we've known of Rupert and participated in his teachings and works, we felt the same.
Yeah, another word that I might add to that is humility. He's a man of great spiritual humility.
Yeah, I think for me, on my journey, my ongoing, continuing journey, I've been very fortunate to have people appear in my life via YouTube and other things when I need them most. And
wonderful how that works, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
When you know how it works, there's no secret. But when you don't know how it works, you scratch your head. And in fact, Rob, I think it's you to whom I owe an eternal debt of gratitude, because I was watching your video with Rick Archer on Batgap a few years ago. I just so you know, during COVID, I was living in Ireland. My sons, who must have been sort of 11 and 7 at the time, were in the UK with their mother. I was in Ireland, and I got trapped in Ireland, and so I was separated from my sons. And I think, along with many people, COVID was a particularly dark time. And in the interview with Rick, you said you got to a point where you had nothing else to say other than, I can't do this on my own, send help.
Right.
And that has been a mantra to me from the very moment I heard it. I could tell you, I was on the mass transit line going from where I lived into Dublin to go to work. I can tell you exactly where I was when I heard that, and it's become a mantra for me since then. So I wanted to thank you deeply from the bottom of my heart for that, as I say, mantra, because it continues to stand me in good stead.
That's touching. I appreciate you saying that. You know. And of course, that request is always granted. So.
Yes.
Yes.
It's sincere, it's always granted.
But we need to recognize the messengers, and I think that for me has been one of the most illuminating journeys. Is the help is, well, the help has always been there, because God and Jesus were always there. It's just I wasn't seeing the messengers. So I think when I kind of hit rock bottom, and to quote the psalmist, from my despair I cried unto the Lord, and my voice reached him even in his temple. I think that's when I started to see that the help was all around, and I didn't need to come on wings through a ray of light from heaven. It's all around me all the time,
and always has been.
Yes,
and always will be.
Yeah, and sometimes it comes in unusual or unexpected forms, and it can be hard to recognize unless you're on the lookout for them.
You don't hear this from the pulpit.
Oh, Brian.
Stir the pot.
Yes. No, absolutely.
But even those hard dyed in the wool religionists, they will come to the light. It's inevitable.
Well, Brian, you're talking to one. I was my approach to faith was formulaic, and I confused the church with God, and so I was believing in the church, and I was trying to follow the rules of the church. not realizing that that was getting in the way of the real message. And so through the last four or 5 years or so, when I've really started to understand myself, because I needed to understand who I was, and I think for all of us who don't understand who we are and require the stripping away of the Western capitalist identity that we've created for ourselves, that's a very painful process. So for me, it was getting divorced, because I identified myself as a husband and a father, and so when that was taken away, what was left? Who am I? It's the great question.
Yeah.
And,
Yes.
and so through many encounters with people on, Rob, listening to you on Badcap, a lot of Badcap interviews, Rupert, etc., Brian, yourself, and indeed talking to you, Mark, as well, I started to understand that it's I don't need to be anything other than who I am. And that's when I started to hear the kind of messages coming to me, and so Brian, this is coming back to your comment about the pulpit. The messages were exactly the same messages that I'd always heard. It was the word of Jesus, but it was just distilled down to its essence, and it was quite simply, love one another as I have loved you. I give you 2 commandments: is love God and love each other. It's so, to me, and I can only speak from my own experience, it has become that simple. And so having been formulaic, and so, for example, commandments, thou shalt not. Basically, Jesus said, if you just love, then you won't do any of that stuff. You don't need to worry about thou shalt not, because you won't get there in the first place if you just start from a position of love.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. You have to be willing to allow all that superficial stuff, the doctrines, the false doctrines, so many false doctrines from the church. The primary one being that God was so angry with his creation that he was going to destroy it. What an absurdity in itself. That he sent his only begotten Son to save us by submitting himself to being a blood sacrifice for our sins. And that false doctrine is still being preached from the pulpit. Still. I mean, how long is it going to take them to realize we got that completely wrong? I mean, there's so much good stuff in the Bible, but there is a scattering of bad seed throughout the scriptures, which we need to learn. Which are we going to espouse? Those that give us inner peace and point us to the light, or those that are going to get us going round like this, saying, what am I supposed to believe?
So first, what you were saying about stripping away the Western capitalist identity, this is what I really like about the non-dual path, is it strips away all those false identities, and you're just asking, who am I, what am I, where am I, and then looking for direct experience to answer those questions.
Absolutely, direct experience. And Rob, Chris and I both have fairly long commutes into London, where we work a few days a week. And in my journey, there have been occasions, and I've shared with Brian, where I've been sitting on this train load of people, all sorts from the world, and just felt this amazing connection and outpouring of love for each and every one of them, no matter how sort of externally strange or odd or different they may seem. And that reminds me of your early stories of walking down the street, just looking at everyone, having that same feeling. and it can be quite disturbing, actually. Certainly,
That's interesting.
You look at a trainload of people about to leave London.
It's interesting you should say disturbing, which I find curious. And Linda, our dear friend Linda, who's about 78, when she told me that when she was a little girl, maybe 5, she had an actual experience of oneness, where it wasn't just other people, it was everything. Even the houses that she was walking by, there was that, you can't make this up. Either you're experiencing it and you inwardly know it, even if you don't understand it, and she certainly didn't when she was 5, and it scared her because she didn't know what it was about. So we have to go one step at a time. And no doubt there was a reason why Linda had that experience when she was 5, but it's taken her a few years to generally move into a sense of alignment with that. And now she can experience anything, and she's completely at ease with it because she knows where it's coming from. This is where the ignorance of Homo slumberus, as I call them, or call us, is in need of some help. But help is for wimps. We mustn't ask for help because it means we're a failure. We've got to do this all by ourselves. That's one of the first lines.
If you just look at the externals, it seems like people are very, very different. But those are just costumes. They're just roles people are playing in this incarnation. And below the surface, everyone is made of the same, you could call it divine stardust, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. And I think, Brian, sorry, to sort of refine my statement of disturbing, I would say I experienced cognitive dissonance between the 3D and what Rob's just talked about, because looking at the very large tattooed person eating a bucket of KFC and feeling this outpouring of love for them created this sense of dissonance, whereas previously I would have judged them. And yet, I'm just, as Rob has just perfectly said, there was that connection of who we really are beyond the costumes, beyond the illusion. Yeah, it was wonderful.
You know, that's just what the ego mind does. It's conditioned to judge people who are different. And my ego does that too. And I haven't found a way to stop it from doing that, but I found a very simple tool to work with it. And when it goes into judgment, like of the big person with tattoos eating KFC, I just say, not me, not mine, and let it float away.
Their journey. Yeah. Absolutely.
One of the little mantras that I've used in that regard is, I'm observing this experience, but I'm not owning it. I'm simply allowing it and looking beyond it.
And of course, there's the Neil Donald Walsh, this is an observation, not a judgment.
Yes.
Which always
I remember him saying to God, it sure sounds like a judgment to me.
And God saying, no, it's an observation.
Yes.
Absolutely. So, Rob, are there, I was just saying, are there timelines to Helen Hamilton's move to the States?
She's moving in August of next year. Her partner lives in Philadelphia, so that's where she's starting off.
Right.
And then, again, the plan is to travel around and just see what happens.
Is he American?
He is American, I believe. Yeah.
Right. So you know him from living in the same part of the world, as it were, even though it's an adjacent state.
I met him at the June retreat, but only very briefly, and I didn't really get to talk to him at all. So I can't really say that I know him.
Have you had a chance to communicate with Christian Sundberg?
I have, and actually he's driving into Cleveland later today, and we're going for a walk in a park. So I'll meet him in person.
Oh, For the first time.
For the first time.
Oh, that's great.
Because
Yeah,
we invited him to join this call, but clearly he's driving. So, excellent. Oh, that is such good news, Rob. Please send him our best regards.
I will.
Yes. We really enjoyed our connection with him. And they've already been, after only a couple of weeks, I don't know if you noticed that it's been uploaded, the recording with him, onto my YouTube channel. And there've been something like 250 viewings in 10 or 14 days, something like that. And so since I'm not world famous for my YouTube recordings, that's fairly good going. Yeah, excellent. I'd love to know him better. Will this be the first time you've met him, Rob?
This is the first time, and I don't really know much about him, so I'm looking forward to hearing more.
Oh, fabulous, fabulous.
He's not just driving all this way for a walk in the park. I'm assuming he'll be staying a little longer.
You know, I think he may actually be going back tonight, but I don't think I'm the only person he's visiting here. I think he has friends here.
Right.
Okay.
That makes sense.
So he won't be stopping for a bucket of KFC to nourish him on his return journey.
Probably not.
Rob, I've a friend with whom I've worked for a number of years who is she's definitely on the journey, but is still trying to understand what it means, because it's such a shock to the system when you come from the ego mind. And the reason why I mention her is because of Christian's background with the pre-life understanding, and my friend, well, I was talking about Christian and the pre-life planning, and the concept that we can choose our parents. And she went as white as a sheet, and she said, when my son was very little, and I hugged my husband, he would get in the way and say, leave him alone, he's mine. I chose him when I was in heaven. And so when she always just thought that was a sort of childish nonsense, and then when I was explaining this, she suddenly got this, as I said, she went as white as a sheet as she realized that perhaps actually, as you know, when before we become of the world, and we still have that, we retain the memory of not being of the world, I guess we're able to say those things. So
Didn't he say something along the lines of, he's mine, I found him first, I chose him?
Yes, I chose him first. I chose him. Yeah.
But sorry, Rob, carry on.
Well, I was that made me think of an interesting story. Years ago, I was at Findhorn, the spiritual community in Scotland, to give a talk. And somebody who lived there was hosting me. And she said to me one morning, there's a boy here who has pre-birth memories. His name is Gabriel. You should try to meet him while you're here. Well, then we had breakfast. We walked out the front door of her house to go somewhere. There's a boy riding by on a bike, and she says, oh, there he is right now. So she waves him over, and she introduces me. And I said, so Gabriel, I understand you have some memories from before you were born. And he said, yes, I do. I remember choosing my parents. I said, really? That's so interesting. Can you tell me about it? He said, yeah. I was with my sister, and we were being shown all the souls who could be our parents. And there was all this light around two of them. And I pointed to those two, and I said, those are the ones I want. That's what you remember. Yeah.
So he incarnated with his sister into the same parents.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, really interesting.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We had an experience when our older daughter was about 3 or 4, and this was their first year in school. And so she was writing Christmas cards for all her friends at school. And she wrote, and so my wife said, okay, give me the cards and I'll make sure they're delivered. So she was handing them over. But this one card she wrote, and then when she'd finished, she put it in no, she didn't put it in the envelope. She climbed up on the piano stool and stood it on top of the piano. And Teresa said, no, darling, that's not quite the way it works. You give it to me and I'll make sure it gets to whoever it is. And Sarah looked at Teresa with great disdain and said, Mother, you don't understand anything. This is for Peter. Well, we'd never spoken about Peter, who was our first child, or stillborn at 6 months. And we'd never spoken with Sarah about him, but she knew him. And she told us years later that this was the first incarnation she'd had where they weren't together, because he was stillborn and he's still around with us in spirit. He would be possibly even exactly the same age as Mark, because had he gone to full term, he would have been born in April 1971.
I was April 1970.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, you're right. Yes, 1970. But he was stillborn then, and Sarah was born a year later.
That's amazing.
So, and Peter has made himself well known with Mark. He's a whiz kid at anything electronic or electrical, even plumbing and whatever, and helps us to sort out any issues.
So sometimes when Brian and I are chatting, the light that I have in my desk, when we chat about Peter, it goes on and off without anyone going near it.
Brian, if Lisa and I have any electrical issues, can we feel free to call on Peter?
Of
Go for
course.
it.
Yeah, please, will you do that, please?
Yeah.
Make sure that Lisa knows this.
Mm.
He's here, like all of us, to be truly helpful and wholly harmless. And he's nodding his head vigorously.
And he's a beautiful soul.
Yes,
He also rides with me in my car when I drive to the station at 5 a.m. to catch the train to London, because my car has electrical problems and he keeps it going. Bless him.
Yes.
Chris, why don't you tell Brian and Rob the story about Rudyard and Conrad in the forest?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I think that's a lovely story.
This was many years ago. The boys were much smaller. I've got two sons. Conrad is the older boy and Rudyard is the younger. And we were walking through a forest down Rob, we're down in the south of England. So there are patches of where we live that you just know are ancient. I know all of it's exactly the same age, but you know what I mean, is you enter a space and you just know that this is, you're on ancient territory here. And I was walking through this wood and I had Rudd on my shoulders. Conrad was lagging behind. And I could feel Rudd had turned to look behind him to see where Conrad was. And he said, Daddy, who is the lady that Conrad is talking to? So I turned around and there was nobody there. Conrad was on his own. So I called him. I said, Conrad, have you just seen a woman? He goes, no, I haven't. And so I asked Rudd to describe the woman, using his mother as a benchmark. You know, is she older or younger than Mummy? Did she have long hair, short hair? And that way, he described a youngish girl. I would have said a sort of a teenage girl wearing a long dress, which obviously these days nobody goes for a walk in a forest in a long dress.
No.
And it was. I found it quite alarming, quite disturbing, and I hurried my way out of the out of the wood. But looking back on it now, it makes perfect sense, because when children are that young, they can see things that we lose the ability to see.
Mm.
Yeah.
And that may well have been an older sister of Conrad who wasn't here this time.
She clearly meant no harm.
Hmm.
Did your wife have any miscarriages?
Oh, you've just sent a shiver down my spine. Yes, she did. That's never entered my mind. But she did. Our first attempt at having a child was a miscarriage.
That's the only one.
Yes, just one. Yeah.
I understand that of all the conceptions that take place, about 25% of them end in miscarriage globally. So there are a lot of souls walking around wondering why their parents are ignoring them, which is what happens. So because people don't understand about the reality of survival, continuity, whatever you want to call it, when there's a miscarriage, they don't think that that was a soul on its way in, but that didn't make it. Something went wrong, or they changed their mind. But there's still a soul which survives the miscarriage and will grow up in spirit, reach adulthood. I've seen this. Teresa had 6 pregnancies, 2 of which made it through to term and are now in their 50s. And the other 4, the oldest one, Peter, who would now be 54. And then there was a daughter, Diana. After the next 2 were our 2 that are here with us now. Then there was Diana, following after Victoria. And then there was Jessica, who has reincarnated. I'm not going to mention the name because this person is known to us, to other people. But she's around, and she was desperate to incarnate in 1975, but didn't make it. And so in about 1983 or thereabouts, she did reincarnate and is now in her late 20s and married.
Hmm.
No offspring. Oh, but talking of offspring, Rob, you may not be aware of this, and neither you, Chris. Teresa and I are about to become great grandparents.
Oh, congratulations. Wow.
And we discovered a couple of days ago that this incoming soul will be male in this incarnation.
Well,
So,
congratulations.
Exciting time to join the gang, right?
yes. Yes. I hope I'll still be around for a while to enjoy it.
Yeah.
I'm trusting in that sense. Absolutely trusting.
On that note, earlier today when Brian and I caught up, we were discussing a video released about 2 weeks ago by a fairly famous British astrologer. Brian, her name is Pam Gregory. And Chris, I sent you the link.
I think I sent it to you as well, Rob.
You did. I watched the first few minutes, but I haven't seen most of it.
It's worth staying with if you can force 2 minutes into an hour. Expand it.
But what Rob, watch it in due course. But the great affirmative thing about this video from Pam is she doesn't normally do this kind of narrative video. She is very much into her astrology, and so she talks about charts and signs and things. But this hour, she sat and spoke, as Brian said earlier, without notes, from the heart to what she's seeing happening in the next 2 years, sort of 25, 26, 27. And it is so affirming and so uplifting. and speaks eloquently to the ascendancy, to the awakening, to the shift, and a world, 1,000 years of compassion and love and peace coming to a 4/5D world, as opposed to where we've been. Not without its bumps on the way and various other bits and pieces, but really
definitely an ascendancy, not a descendancy.
Yes, absolutely. Really uplifting and affirming. And as I said to Brian earlier, so aligned with so many messages from other people, from other channels, probably, Liesl included, in the Beings of Light and all the rest. Such an exciting time. So Brian, what made me think of this was the advent of your first great-grandchild. Super brave, but super cool, right?
Yes.
What a time.
I kind of decided that I was going to attune with this incoming soul for whatever I could actually make contact with. When the pregnancy was first announced, and I did get a sense of connectedness, and this soul I sensed had been female, but this time round was choosing to be male. And I got the energy, the feminine energy, undergoing a kind of merging or doing a dance with maleness. So, well, it'd be interesting to see how things develop.
Mark, can you share any more of what Pam Gregory says? Was she more specific about the next few years?
Brian, help me out here as we go.
Okay.
But absolutely. So it is a group movement or raising of consciousness. And it wasn't Pam who said this, but someone else said it. I watched in the last few days, is that negative energy is separating. It's of the dual. Whereas positive energy is connecting. And therefore, the shift that is imminent, and I'll come to what Pam said about the manifestation of the shift shortly, but you can have any number of people who are negative and separated, but it just takes a few who are connected, because the connectedness is accretive, and it grows and grows and grows.
Yeah.
Whereas the negative separative, it's not the same dynamic. So people who look at the world and say, well, there's still 8 billion people fast asleep, that's not the point, really. We get to the tipping point through the people who are on the journey fairly soon. But what Pam was saying is that there will be an event, I guess is the best word, that might happen in a moment, or it might happen over a couple of days, where the larger number of those here currently wake up consciously, either willingly or unwillingly, to the fact that love is the core principle of the universe. Compassion, care, kindness, and Brian, you've said this a number of times. Literally, a Ukrainian and a Russian who are pointing guns at each other will just wake up and say, "Well, why am I doing that? We're all one."
Yes.
So, Rob, to answer your question more succinctly, within the next 2 years, she is saying that there will be an event that is either of a sort of shorter time or slightly longer time, between a moment and 2 or 3 days, where this switch happens, and then we all find ourselves in the new world.
Well, that would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Sure.
Bloody amazing. And she, well, I was saying earlier to Brian, the great thing about this message is it's consistent with others, from Cryon to Bashar to Dolores Cannon. You know, you can name all of the people who've been talking about this transition, I guess is the word.
Although in the Age of the Heart, the Sebastian Blakesley book, doesn't Jesus say that the event, the big shift, is in, I think he said 2033, if I remember correctly?
That is about the size of it, and she does mention that. But Jesus also explains in his answer to Glenn Hoberman's question about when's this going to happen and what's it going to be like. Jesus explains through Sebastian that it's not a single event that will start and become the main event. There have been a series of events leading up to this on a one stage at a time basis. He mentions several, 2 or 3 of which I can bring to mind. One was flower power, hippiedom in the 1960s, 1967, epicentered in San Francisco, and that started to move the consciousness of humanity away from going along with prior generations' rules and saying this is the way you've got to do it. And they were saying, no, we're going to plow our own furrow. We're going to just chuck out the stuff that no longer applies and start living according to our own inner guiding. Another one was the end of the Mayan calendar, 2012, winter solstice 2012, unless you're in the southern hemisphere when it's the summer solstice. And another one was the global financial meltdown of 2007-08. I don't know if you were in financial services that long ago, but you may have been on the sharp end of some of that.
Certainly were. 08, 09. But Rob, I think also that, as far as I've understood it, and I may be wrong, is that timeline from Sebastian and Jesus was between now and 2033, within the next 10 years.
Okay.
And that there will be a number of events, an increasing number as time goes by. And I heard somebody say the other day that the number of people who are starting their awakening in the last 4 months is greater than the number of people starting their awakening 4 years ago. And the number of people starting their journey within the last 4 weeks is greater than the numbers 4 months. And then the same with the 4 days and 4 weeks. So it's definitely doing this, the accelerating momentum.
Rob, just to give you, I still can't get my excuse me, I still can't get my head around it, but I've given up trying to understand any of this stuff. As you heard, there are three of us brothers, one in Australia, and at the time, Mark was in the UK, I was in Ireland, and this was pre-COVID, so we didn't talk to each other very often at all, very sporadically. We certainly didn't talk to each other together on a Zoom call. That came later with COVID. And so when we started talking to each other together on Zoom with our parents who live in Scotland, Mark, being the eagle-eyed and busybody nosy Parker that he is, we're on a call and he saw my brother was doing a screen share, and behind whatever he was showing us was his email inbox, and Mark spied a Course in Miracles email. So now Mark and I had been chatting because we're in the same time zone. When COVID started, we started chatting to each other on a Saturday, and Mark was introducing me to some of his experiences in this very start of his journey. So we were having an open conversation with each other about the possibility that there was more to all of this than we had understood. And then he called my brother and said, "Hey, I saw this Course in Miracles in your inbox." So long story short, it transpires that you've got three brothers living in different countries who had started to think differently at the same time. Now, we all come from very conservative background. We're from South Africa. Our father's an Anglican minister. So all of that, and the three of us, and we all had very different attitudes growing up. We certainly didn't think the same. I don't think we particularly liked each other very much growing up. But the three of us, independently of one another, had started on this journey. So if that, Brian, is replicating now in an exponential curve, it I can understand, because it's happened to us in the most improbable of circumstances.
Well, what you've just said reminds me about what Jesus tells us in the Course, that, and I'm paraphrasing the idea that he's sharing, wherever there is a chink in the defensive shutters, the light will shine in. And it only needs to be a tiny crack, which perhaps the defender doesn't realize has happened consciously, that light will come in. And so that must accord with our pre-birth plan. I'm going to come in and set myself some challenges for growth, but at some point I'm going to allow the light to get in so that it can help to carry me forward.
Yeah, and that's, one of the main functions of the challenges that we plan before we're born is to create a crack in the ego's defenses so that the light can get in.
Yes. Some people will only let that crack open with a stick of dynamite. I have a sister-in-law like that. She is terrified of everything and doesn't want to hear about the journey that Teresa and I have been on. I don't even know if there was a Jesus. I don't even know if there is a God. Whoa, hunker down, hunker down. Bless her. She's a darling soul, but terrified of life, terrified of death, terrified of everything in between. Fearful. So, amazing. So what was her pre-birth plan, I wonder?
Well, I was going to ask you, Brian, where do you think that kind of fear comes from?
Surely previous incarnations, previous in quotes, must have something to do with it. Some bad experiences.
Sort of, what did the Vedic guys call it? Samsaras.
Oh, do they?
The baggage that comes with you, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
I had an interesting conversation with my son, Peter, quite a few years ago when he was, in worldly terms, probably late teens. And I said something to him about, I really would like to join with you more, but there's still so much baggage to be unburden myself of. And he said immediately, there is nothing to prevent you from bringing your baggage with you, and we will help to ease it from you, one bit at a time. So we don't have to be perfect before we get there. They will, he and all our loved ones in spirit will help us. That's what they're there to do. How unwilling is the ego for us to accept help?
I saw an interesting channeled message the other day that said that currently 40% of the human population is so heavily ego defended that no light at all can get in. But I think that 40% is a much smaller percentage than it used to be.
Oh, yes. I wouldn't doubt that for a moment.
And Rob, I think one of the greatest tragedies of the last 2,000 years is that the majority of humanity has clung to a system of formal religious belief that they have genuinely felt was taking them in the right direction, but was taking them further and further away from the truth. If you think of let's take the Crusades as an example. You could not get a greater corruption of the teaching of Christ than for people to think by going to the other side of the world and slaying thousands of human beings, we will endear ourselves to God. And that to me is the, in my own very short life, I have lived through a microcosm of that type of experience, of clinging to a belief that was just getting in the way. But I think that really has been the great tragedy of the last 2,000 years.
That's true, except to add that it was all part of the Great Rescue Program, as Jesus described this to me, his program, his plan for rescuing his brothers in the sonship, that was all part of the plan. And I've written about this in my first book, I think in chapter 10, describing or explaining the meaning behind the parable of the 3 measures of meal. And the 3 measures of meal relate to 3 2,000-year epochs, the first epoch of which I was prompted to dub the Abraham measure, because that started nominally 4,000 years ago. There's a 4 foot. The second measure of meal started approximately 2,000 years ago, what I was prompted to dub the Jesus measure. The first measure I was prompted to dub the Abraham measure, the second the Jesus measure, and the third measure, which we're now in the switchover between, and indeed moving now decades into the third measure, and that's the kingdom measure. And so if you think about how far humanity sank into a pit of darkness, let's say prehistory, when whatever events were unfolding that we don't know much or anything about, by the time Abraham arose on the scene, there was already conflict. Most of the history we know about is from the Old Testament, covering the Middle East. And who knows what was going on in China and Europe and Russia and wherever. So here we have a being who we now know and love as Jesus, deciding that he was in a position to bring some help in the way of a rescue program. And now, so I've asked him, and lots of people have asked him, why has this taken so long? Why do we have to go through all this hell? And why couldn't you have just made it happen quicker? Well, one of the primary reasons is free will. Jesus can't say, you're going to do this, you've got to do that. He can only nudge us and offer suggestions. And the same with what we refer to in Christianity as the Holy Spirit. And Jesus says in A Course in Miracles that he was a manifestation of the Holy Spirit. And since we are Jesus's siblings in the sonship of God, we also must be manifestations of the Holy Spirit. But while we are pursuing our path of free will, going into outer darkness, which Jesus told us 2,000 years ago, you need to turn round and face the opposite direction because you're heading into outer darkness. When we turn round, then we're facing the light and we can start moving back towards it. So he had to call us to, and the word used in scripture is repent. Now the church has given a very different interpretation of that word from what Jesus actually meant, which simply means if you turn around from facing into the dark, you will find your own shadow falling on the path before you, which is going to enable greater stumblings to take place. If you turn around and face the light, the shadow will be behind you and you'll have pure, bright light, the light of life, shining on the path in front of you, making the journey less troubled, indeed, increasingly less troubled. So the first measure of meal, the Abraham measure, Jesus had to establish a race of people, the Jews, as being a race of people into which the light of the world could incarnate. So it took from Abraham to the time of Jesus's incarnation to establish that. And look how many things went wrong, like Nebuchadnezzar taking the Jewish people into captivity for centuries, and the situation in Egypt, where they were 400 years in slavery and were brought out by a man, an amazing man called Moses, about whom I would love to know more, because he was, well, what a character, what a tower of strength. And so it took 2,000 years with all the blips going on in that period, and then the situation was sufficient, and King David had a lot to do with that, getting the nation of Israel united and fighting off all the enemies around, and giving them a sound bashing, which needed to be done, so that the light of the world, Jesus of Nazareth, could come in and set moving the second measure of meal, which is moving people into a unified state of light. Well, a great mind, a great soul, brings all sorts of new understandings, but the people that are following him never understood him in the first place. So as soon as he went, after only 33 years, they're squabbling amongst themselves and deciding we've got to be doing this because the Jews have already done that. And the other one's saying, well, we've got to welcome the non-Jews, the Goyim, into our midst and let them follow their own practices. Well, that created schisms and schisms and schisms over the last 2,000 years. But now sufficient numbers have moved into the place of acceptance of what's really going on, as brought to us by Jesus in, of course, in miracles and all the other stuff that he's still bringing through Sebastian and others, so that now it's, as he said to me on several occasions, and indeed my younger son in spirit, Christopher, he said, the Great Rescue Program is infallible and unstoppable. Now, those are two very powerful words, and thank goodness for them, because whatever doubts we may have if we make the mistake of switching on the 6 o'clock news, hurriedly switching it back off again if we've got any sense, will tell us that the Great Rescue Program could fall at the next hurdle. But that's not accounting for he who is in charge of the Great Rescue Program, who is recorded in the scriptures that Christians claim to revere. All power is given unto me in heaven and earth. Well, What is it about all power that they don't understand if they think it could go wrong?
Well, so Brian, I just want to digress from this political conversation because there's a question I want to ask Rob before I lose the opportunity. Rob, we were talking earlier about and you mentioned the increase in the number of people who are quote unquote awakening. And I'd love to know if you find in your day-to-day life, if you are finding little situations where you have a conversation with somebody that you don't know them, they're a complete stranger, but the conversation then quickly develops into talking about this type of conversation in a way that even 5 years ago you would never have experienced.
I think that is happening. My sense is that there's been a global awakening going on for a number of years now. And like Brian was saying, it's accelerating exponentially. So more and more every day, more and more, and it just gets faster and faster.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear that because I find I work in the financial services, and it's not an environment renowned for its spirituality, but I find I have increasingly I will find myself in a one-on-one situation where I will have a conversation with somebody, and the topic is such that I just think to myself in the moment, this would never have happened even a few years ago, which of course is a great encouragement.
Mm.
Yeah, and I would suspect that from a pre-birth planning perspective, the fact that you, Mark, and you, Chris, are both in the financial world, that's almost certainly part of your plan, because there are light workers stationed strategically everywhere they're needed, including in financial services.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because I often think that I'm going completely stark staring mad because I get this information just comes into my head and I know that it's not my own. I know that it's coming from somewhere else. And one message that has been consistent over the last couple of years is that I'm doing what I'm doing not for myself, but for other people. I don't need to know who they are. I don't need to know what impact I'm having. I don't need to know when I'm having an impact. But I just need to keep being me every day. And to use the quote from the Bible, let your light shine before the world that all may see your Father's good works, or see your good works and give thanks to your Father in heaven. So I'm very conscious that because I would love not to work where I work. I would love to do something different. But I do keep getting a very clear message that I'm doing what I'm doing, and it's not for me, it's for other people. And I just need to keep being me. Because I say, well, what do I need to do? And the message is, you don't need to do anything. Just be the real you, not the you that you think you need to, just be you.
Yeah, and I'm sure your primary form of service, and this is true for everybody on the planet, is through your vibration. It's not through anything you do with your physical body.
100%.
But Rob, that is so hard to remember when you're in the moment. It's so hard to remember that there is the bigger picture.
I must just share with you a short quote from Jesus, January 19th, 1997, in which he said to me, and this is for all of us, anything Jesus says to any one of us is for all of us, no exceptions ever, even though most people wouldn't want to admit that, but that's the reality. Have no fear, have no concern. All events of heaven and earth are known to me. I have dispatched my jewels to all appropriate places to fulfill those things that are needful for the kingdom purpose to go forward.
There you go.
So you're a jewel, in the crown of of glory of Papa's one beloved son. You are a jewel in that crown. You are a jewel. We're all a jewel with our own purpose, placed wherever was intended by he who's in charge of the Great Rescue Program. So I was in advertising and I hated it. It made me ill. But I spent a few years there, and now, as things are moving along, that 8 or 10 years, whatever it was, will be serviceable in the plans that are gestating here, or here more likely. So it'll be possible to make use of what I gleaned. And who knows what you're enduring now, Chris, and you also, Mark, and you were in marketing, which you hated, didn't you, Rob?
That's right. That's absolutely right.
So it will serve a purpose. And I've already observed how your time in marketing is serving you very well with promulgating the work that you're now undertaking, helping to bring it to the public attention.
Yeah, I've often had that thought myself. I wish I had known that when I was back
in the day. So now we have this dichotomy of dual and non-dual, and dual and non-dual.
Yes, very good.
Better to be dual than non-dual.
Chris, Mark is referring to the fact that my mother in this lifetime has significant mental health issues, and she was very abusive to me when I was a child. But a couple of years ago, I had an experience in which most of my consciousness went home, went back to the other side, and a lot
most of your what?
It went back to the other side, went home.
You said most of my
consciousness.
Consciousness, Brian.
Oh, consciousness.
Awareness.
Yeah. And while I was there, a lot of different things happened. But the most significant thing, my mother's soul showed up, and there was nothing but love between us. And I just kept saying, soul, I love you, I love you, I love you. And it was truly heartfelt and very, very powerful as well.
Yeah, no, that's incredible, and it's so affirming to hear that, because it's a lived experience of it's a concept I believe in, but whenever I can hear somebody express it in the first person, it's very encouraging to know that it's not just a fairy story.
Right.
Rob, how far has that event, when you had that meeting with your mother from Spirit, how far has that taken you in terms of your healing from the trauma of that childhood experience?
And that's probably it's taken me a long way, and it's probably the single most significant contributor to the healing that has taken place. I mean, I knew from my work and all my research and everything that was probably the case. But then once I had a direct experience of it, like Chris is saying, that's just completely different.
And Rob, had you asked specifically for help with that specific aspect of your life?
I have. I don't remember now if I asked for it right before that actually happened, but periodically over the years I've prayed for assistance with healing that. And, the healing comes whenever that time is right.
And I can't agree with you more, because I have pondered, because I've had similar, in a much lesser extent than your own personal experience, but that having some traumatic event that from which I would like to have some healing and some closure. And there has been quite a long period in chronological terms between asking for the help and the help coming. And the answer that I've been given when I say, why couldn't this have happened earlier? The answer I've been given is that it could only happen when I could cope with the resolution, if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm being clear.
It makes complete sense, and I think that's true for everybody. But most people don't have that understanding.
It is the profound ignorance of Homo slumberus that makes it very difficult to find a niche into which one can start offering some love and light. They think you're a religious freak if you want to, you know, like the cartoon that Chris shared with us about two men standing at a bus stop. One is wearing a top on which it says, "Let's talk about Jesus." And he's saying to the other person, "This always guarantees me a seat by myself on the bus."
I have 2% left on my battery, so I think I'm going to excuse myself before it dies.
Okay.
But this has been very, very enjoyable. And Chris, a pleasure meeting you, really.
Likewise, Rob, it is, like I say, I do owe you a debt of gratitude, which I hope to repay in spirit one day. But it's been a real pleasure for me to meet you.
Well,
now we've got the connection made. If we choose, let's do this again anytime
Absolutely.
when the moment is right.
Yeah, I would like that very, very much.
Thank you all. Blessings. Have a good afternoon, rest of your day, and we'll
Likewise.
see you soon.
Yes.
Yes, peace to you all.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Bye.
Bless
Bye-bye.
you.